ये है भारत एफएम।
बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत।
Good evening, India, and a very good morning to California and the eastern side of the United States. Welcome to Storytellers Cafe, and I'm your host, Usha Venkatraman. Happy Thanksgiving to all my viewers in the United States. Let me tell you a little bit trivia about Thanksgiving Day. It's a national annual holiday in the United States and Canada, celebrating the harvest and other blessings of the past year. Isn't that wonderful to have one day in a year where we thank the blessings? And we definitely need to do that. Americans generally believe that their Thanksgiving is modeled on a 1621 harvest feast shared by the English colonists of Plymouth and Wampanoag people. I think they're the Native Americans. They shared an autumn harvest feast and is acknowledged today as one of the first Thanksgiving celebrations in the colonies. Well, that was about Thanksgiving. I hope everyone is staying safe, protected, wearing your masks, maintaining social distancing as we are going forward towards another lockdown. Stay safe, my friends. Sit back and listen to stories on Storytellers Cafe. Forget about all your troubles for the next 30 minutes. Winter's special on Storytellers Cafe. Our special guest tonight is Roopa Mohan. Of course, morning for you in California. Storytellers Cafe presents Roopa Mohan, our guest tonight from San Francisco, California. Roopa is a storyteller from Walnut Creek, California. She migrated to the US after spending the first 2 decades of her life in South India. Over the years, moved with her family all over this vast country before settling in the Bay Area. After retiring from her NGO job, Roopa trained as a volunteer storyteller for school groups at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. We will definitely be in conversation with Roopa about this storytelling training as a volunteer in the museum. Roopa tells stories surrounding the objects in the museum's vast collection and is also a school docent there. She is now expanding her repertoire, sharing personal experiences and stories she heard growing up in India. Roopa loves sharing stories with diverse storytellers from all over the world. Welcome, Roopa, to Storytellers Cafe. It is our proud privilege to host you. Hi.
Hello, namaste. Welcome to everybody and greetings from California. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you today.
Wonderful, Roopa. Can you tell us a bit about your journey? And also, after working, how did you shift to storytelling or volunteering at the museum? That is a story in itself.
Yeah, I've lived here for a very long time, but of course, my roots are in India, in Chennai, particularly where I grew up and had my best memories. So over the years, we were very nomadic in the US because of my husband's work. We were moving every few years and I guess collecting stories and friendships along the way. I had an NGO job. I was very involved with the domestic violence helpline here in the Bay Area. And after I retired from that, I was looking for volunteer opportunities and happened to come across just a regular volunteer position at the San Francisco Asian Art Museum. And I started, volunteering there. And then they had a opportunity. They extended to me an opportunity to join a new storytelling program. Actually, the program was not new. It had been around for 25 years, but they were offering this training only every 4 or 5 years. And lucky me, I was at the right time, at the right place. And I joined this program. And without really knowing what was in store for me, I just said, let me do it. Because I had no introduction to formal storytelling. I had only heard stories from my grandmas and all those things. So this opened up a whole new window or world of possibilities. And I got started as a storyteller, and we had a 1-year training at the museum where we were trained actually to go into the galleries and start telling stories around all the objects there that they had linked with the stories. And mind you, there are about 18,000 artifacts at the museum, all from Asian countries, and a lot of religious artifacts, especially Hinduism and Buddhism. And we had a big archive of stories to tap into. And from day one, I mean, there was a little bit of theory, but most of it was like going there into the galleries and practicing with mentors and trying different stories. And so over the year, we, built our confidence, and we were ready to tell stories to school groups, K through 6, that would come in. And they had a very, very well structured and wonderful program. And about, I think, over 30 of us graduated and joined the veteran storytellers. And, there's no stopping us.
That is so interesting, Rupa, because when you're talking about the museum, Mumbai too has 2 museums. One is the Prince of Wales, which everyone knows about. The other is the Baudaji Lad Museum.
Mm-hmm.
So I also had the pleasure of working with the museum initially when I joined, and they wanted us to tell stories about the artifacts that are in the museum. So I do understand, but I'm sure yours is a very well structured thing of getting trained in the museum itself. That is very interesting. So can you tell us, like, who trained you? Was it the museum, or were these professional storytellers who trained you into the art and the craft of storytelling?
Actually, the program was put together by their education department, which is, which has very seasoned, educators. Many of them are teachers, but they also, over the years, have, a bunch of veteran storytellers who are, very, very experienced. And they actually took over the job of being our mentors. So we didn't need to get storytellers from outside. It was all within the museum, So, so we were every time we met like once a week, and every time a veteran storyteller would tell us a story, and we would be paired with another one to go into the gallery and practice, and they critiqued us, and we picked up a lot of tips along the way. And so my initial training was all within the museum. And but after a year or so, I got some opportunities to go outside the museum, because there was this big conference, the National Storytelling Conference, that was held in our area. So I happened to go there, and I got exposed to this whole larger world of storytellers, and realized that it was a profession taken very seriously. And I just listened to all of them that year. I didn't participate. But after it went viral, because of the pandemic, and it became virtual and became global, I got some opportunities to start telling on Zoom without having to go to these storytelling festivals all over the country, which I believe is, very, very popular. But I didn't have to do that. Just from my home, I could start telling stories. And I noticed there are not too many Indians, American Indians, I would say that's what I am. Not too many on the scene over here. But when it went virtual, I started meeting people from all over the country, all over the world, like you, because it had gone global. And then we got to, exchange ideas, and we realized that there is so much more to it. And yeah, it's been a good journey so far. And I tell sacred stories, basically for children around all the artifacts in our museum. But now I've realized that I should, start telling stories about my childhood, and which has made me start writing stories. And all those memories are coming back, growing up in Chennai, and listening to stories there, and being exposed by my grandparents and my family to all sorts of cultural and historical things at that time in my life. So I have started actually penning those stories and starting to tell them, and people are interested. They want to hear about our childhood and upbringing, and it's kind of fun to see their reactions. And we find something in common too, because I tell the story about my Catholic school or convent school education, and then there's somebody there who chats and tells me, yeah, I also went to a Catholic school and we had to wear a uniform. So you realize that there are shared experiences, right? So it's been fun. It's been fun exploring all that outside the museum as well.
Thank you, Roopa. In fact, for all you listeners out there, that's how I met Roopa, like she said, on the virtual National Storytelling Networks conference, which was in June. And then we happened to connect through common friends. And here is Roopa as our guest on Storytellers Cafe. Roopa, that's wonderful. So without much more questions being asked, can you dive into a story? And then we could have a little bit of conversation after that.
Okay, I thought I'll start with one of the stories I tell, the young guests at the museum. It's a Japanese story that we tell, around a particular object, which is called a netsuke. These are the tiny miniatures that were very popular during the Edo period in Japan, the 17th, 18th century, even 19th century it went into. And these are cute little objects, animals mostly. And, they used to be worn as toggles as part of the outfit. And I just adore, we have a whole wall of these miniatures and they're very cute. And many of them come with the stories because they're popular folk figures. So this is a story about a magic tea kettle, okay? And it's a very popular story, and I hope you like it. So, Mukashi, long, long ago in Japan, in a little village, there was a temple, and in the temple was a group of priests, and one of the priests loved to collect tea kettles, and he had just purchased a beautiful tea kettle, looked like an antique one with lot of engraving. He got it cleaned and polished, and he wanted to have his tea that afternoon, heating the water in the tea kettle and mixing it with the tea powder and drinking it as they do in Japan. So he set that tea kettle on the stove, added water to it, and soon the water started boiling. And then something very surprising happened. The tea kettle started growing little feet. It started growing a bushy tail. And then a face came out and it went, ouch, 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 I'm burning. Please save me, please save me. It was actually a tanuki, a raccoon dog, very popular and loved in Japan, also a shapeshifter. Now, this Tanuki tea kettle jumped off the stove and started running all over the temple. And the monks chased it down like this. They finally caught it and they held it. But by then, it had turned back into a whole tea kettle again. Oh, this tea kettle is enchanted. Let's get rid of it, said the monk. And what happened? The next day, an old peddler happened to be coming by, a poor old man with a big bag of his wares. And he happened to stop by at the temple. And the priest happily sold that tea kettle to him. And he bought it for a very low price and was very happy with the deal. He went home that evening. He set it on his table and he was looking at it admiringly. Decided to use it the next day, and very tired, he went to sleep. Early in the morning, he was woken up by some strange noises. Krr, 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 krr. He looked and he saw that a creature was staring at him with large tanuki eyes, little tanuki feet, and a bushy tanuki tail. And he looked, and it had the body of his tea kettle. Aren't you the kettle I bought yesterday? Yes, Peddler-san, I am that kettle. I have come here to ask you for something. I am hungry. Can you give me some rice cakes? Also, please keep me here. Don't take me back to that temple. Okay, said the peddler. He was confused, but being a kind old man, he brought the tanuki a rice cake and made him sit down. And the tanuki explained, he said, I am actually a tanuki in disguise, Peddler-san. I am here and I want to be safe. Could you please help me? And I will make you a very rich man. How is that? Wondered the peddler. Yes, I can do magic tricks. And if you build me a little stage, you can become very rich. Okay, said the peddler, and he built him a little stage at the back of his house. And a few days later, they invited their neighbors. Just to humor the tanuki, the peddler went along with it. Well, that very evening, the tanuki was in his elements. He started doing all kinds of acrobatics. He started doing somersaults. He started jumping rope. He started jumping up and down on a trampoline. And he even held a fan like this and pretended to be a Japanese woman and did tricks behind the fan. Soon the neighbors were thrilled. They cheered and they put coins generously for him. Well, word spread that there was a Tanuki tea kettle performing tricks. In fact, this tea kettle had a name, Bambuku, which meant good luck. And Bambuku's fame spread all over. Soon people from neighboring villages came to watch him. And the peddler had to build a bigger stage in another venue just to accommodate everybody. And the tanuki became more and more confident and started doing all kinds of new tricks. In fact, he started walking on a tightrope and doing somersaults on it. And also they said that he even held a parasol like this and he walked all over that tightrope. People were so entranced by him and they could not be stopped. And of course, the money flowed in and the poor peddler became instantly rich. And a few months later, he had so much money, he didn't know what to do with it. But he also noticed that the tanuki was getting rather tired, and he even slipped one time that he was walking the tightrope. So he decided to come up with a retirement plan for the tanuki. He told him, Tanuki, you have worked so hard for me. We have been eating the best rice cakes, drinking superior tea, and enjoying life. But I think you need a break. You need to retire. Why don't I take you back to the temple and make sure they'll take care of you. No, 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 Peddler-san, they will put me on the hot stove again. I don't want to go there. Don't worry, Tanuki. I will make sure that you are loved and respected over there. So the peddler took the Tanuki, who had become a complete teapot or tea kettle again, and they went back to that temple. And the priest came out and happily received them. And when he heard about how the Tanuki was actually one in disguise, they agreed to keep the tea kettle safely and carefully without ever putting it on that hot stove again. In fact, they built an alcove for the Tanuki tea kettle in their treasure house. And every day they remember to keep a rice ball for the Tanuki tea kettle. And it is said that even today, if you happen to visit that temple in remote Japan, you can see that Tanuki tea kettle sitting there, bright and polished and looking very happy with almost a smile on his face. And every night, there is a rice cake placed in front of him, which totally disappears. Arigato. Thank you.
Lovely. Arigato to you too. Thank you for telling such a lovely story, Rupa. Beautiful story about the tea kettle. And Japanese stories are so enchanting. I know a couple which I tell, actually one, Hats for the Jizu. And it's a beautiful story, you know. I mean, all stories are wonderful, but especially I think some of the Asian stories, Japanese stories are enchanting is the word.
Yes.
Thank you for enchanting us with this lovely story. And I love the little props that you used, the parasol. That was indeed very innovative.
Thank you. Well, we have to get creative now from home, you know. So, actually, we do tell that Jisoo story as well, and it's very
Okay.
loved. Yes.
Beautiful story about giving. You know, something which is wonderful and very apt for Thanksgiving, Christmas, the season of, being grateful and thankful and giving back to people. Rupa, coming back to storytelling about the Asian, I'm talking about American Indian tellers. Are there, you did mention a little bit about them. In the United States, not that I should know, I haven't come across any Indian storytellers. I mean, you were the first one, and I did see a couple of people who are watching the National Storytelling Virtual Festival live. One doesn't know whether they are storytellers. So, what is the storytelling scene in California? Are you part of any guild, any association, network? Can you tell us something about that?
First of all, at the museum, we do have about 4 or 5 storytellers, and 1 or 2 have retired who are like legendary storytellers, you know, who are maybe biracial. And so they are there in the at the museum. Yeah, I was surprised at Fremont, especially, which is the hub, you know, for the Indian American community. But that festival, I think there was only one other Indian beside me, you know, and she was, I think, conducting a workshop. So that really surprised me. And I said, we need to have more representation here, especially since our stories are being told and enjoyed by everybody, right? You've seen so many of our folk tales and our sacred stories are all being told by these non-Indian storytellers. So so there is a California Storytelling Association that I've just joined them a few months ago, and I'm on the board right now. So I'm hoping to draw in more storytellers, to encourage storytellers, and to also make sure we hear their voices, because I really think, you know, we need to hear more stories from our community. and even personal stories. Like most of us are first generation immigrants, and there are so many stories about our journey and our the good times and the bad times. And I think it's a good forum to share and also create awareness, and stories and storytelling is very good to unite people, right? So yes, and it brings together people, and the biases all crumble. So I think it's a good time, in fact, now with all this emphasis on extending our boundaries and in being inclusive, and the whole anti-racist movement. I think this is a time where we storytellers should come out and actually start rebuilding our stories and rebuilding our relationships. So I'm hoping it'll happen soon.
Absolutely. I second you on that. And I couldn't agree with you more that we need our voices to be heard. Yes, people are telling the world over stories about India, about our myths. So, when you mean sacred stories, are you talking about what specifically do you mean by sacred? I've always been curious about that.
Yeah. So by sacred, all our because at the museum we have all these beautiful artifacts, lovely, chola bronzes, granite. We have a beautiful collection there. So there are a whole bunch of stories that around those objects. Like Krishna stories. Ganesha is very popular. I mean, there are lovely stories about Ganesha, how he got his head, and all sorts of Ganesha and the moon waning, all those stories. So we would typically take the children to that artifact, and we would look closely at the artifact, and the children, we try to make it as interactive as possible, and then we will sit them down and tell them stories and engage them in participating and interacting with us. So that I think that's a great way to introduce them to world religions, and here Eastern religions in particular. So yeah, I call them sacred stories because they come from our Puranas and all that originally, right? Of
Okay.
course, many of them have become distorted, and so
No,
I'm
yeah.
trying to kind
So,
of address that and try to make sure that we stay away from those distorted,
no.
seemingly cute stories, but which are not very authentic. So
Yeah, no, I just want to say sacred as in our myth stories about Indian mythology.
yes,
So I
it's
think
all,
when you
yeah,
talk about Krishna and Ganesha and all, they come under the Indian
you're right,
mythology
right,
stories.
definitely.
Lovely. So it's time for another story from you, Rupa.
Okay.
So what have you got for us?
I have a personal story that I wrote very recently, and I would love to debut it, to you all, because I hope you can relate to some of it or all of it. So yeah, it's a story about a thing or a friend called Ambi. So here we go. This is called Memories of Ambi. And if you're wondering if Ambi is an old boyfriend, no, not an old boyfriend. But you will find out who Ambi is. Anyway, one cold November day, or at this time of year, all almost 4 decades ago, I landed in San Francisco International Airport, and I had come on this, long Pan Am flight. There had been delay and at Heathrow, and here I was carrying my huge suitcase and a big duffel bag, and wearing a crumpled silk kurta, totally inappropriate for this long journey. But who knew, right? So I landed in San Francisco, and my husband, who had come here earlier, greeted me, and he was so excited with a big smile, and he said, "Oh, I have something for you, a surprise." And You will find out in the garage. And I've been going, what? Surprise. And so we go to the garage, and I'm emotionally and physically drained and a little nervous about, the new life I have to start over here. And in the garage, he points to an automobile. Yes, Chevy Nova, it turns out, mustard color and very sleek. But later I find out that it's a used Chevy Nova, and that was what we could afford then. Anyway, and he points to it and he says, "This is Betsy, your new friend." I was so excited. I wanted to keep it a surprise. So I was surprised, and we started our journey literally in that Chevy Nova. Me as a newlywed, and my husband started his new job here after going to graduate school. So we launched our journey, and I learned. Along the way, there were a lot of milestones, but initially I was really homesick. And after being in Chennai, surrounded by, family and friends, the hustle bustle of the city, this was very quiet. It would get dark at 5 o'clock. And initially I was home just waiting for my husband to come from work. And I missed a lot of things. And you couldn't just pick up the phone and call those days, or, Skype somebody, right? You had to write letters and wait for the once a month short call. In any case, it took me a few months to get over that. But I really missed something or someone. And that was, the ambassador car. See, I had grown up only with ambassadors, and my family was totally loyal to ambassadors, and we girls and young people called it Ambi, right? It was the cool thing to do. And the Ambi was very much a part of my life. My grandpa had one, my dad had one. They all look similar. There were very few colors, right? They were like dark blue or light blue, I think. And of course, those cream Ambis that belong to the politicians and the government of officials, with the light on top, and very like white elephants. They would dominate the streets. And this was a time when the ambassadors, I think, were the most popular. And I read somewhere that 2/3 of the cars were ambassadors, and everybody had an ambassador, and people who are practical, especially like my family, because we wanted the space. We thought it was a solid car. And of course it had been introduced, I think it was modeled after the Morris Oxford or something like that. So ambassadors totally dominated the scene. And this Ambi name was very appropriate, because here this was a reliable, solid car, very plain looking. Every new model would come out with hardly any changes or innovations. They would all be pretty identical. Just like this, in our Tamil families, we always had a boy called Ambi, right? The boy who would help out at weddings and funerals. He was this solid, reliable boy, very simple and not flamboyant at all, but he would be doing all the work behind the scenes. So I look back and I think this is a very, very appropriate name for this car. In any case, I remember beautiful times we had when, my dad would drive it, and we would all, my sister and I and my mom would sit and do these long road trips, stopping under a tamarind tree for lunch, usually having curd rice and tamarind rice and just plain water in a jug or a guja. And no air conditioning, no cassette player. But my dad used to sing, and we would sing along. And of course, we would, just manually put the windows down, and the hot breeze would come through. But we didn't care. It was so spacious. We could sleep in the back seat. And of course, the trunk was extra spacious. The trunk that we call dicky, and I was told never to use that word in America. But in any case, so everything was great about the Ambi. So who wanted to go to a Fiat or a Herald those days, right? And So life went on, and the time came for me to learn to drive one. And my mom had been quite a trendsetter about 30 years ago. Before that, my grandpa had taught her to drive, and she had quickly learned. And she was like later driving us all over fearlessly, though she would complain that it was like driving a lorry, because of the gears. And so when it was my turn, my tata said again, my grandpa, I'll take you and teach you to drive like I did for my daughter. So he took me to the big beach in Chennai, Marina Beach, which has inside like an interior road. So we went there with the L board, and my grandpa, very bravely was teaching me to drive, and I wasn't as confident or as good as my mom. So it took a while for me to learn. And then when I was out, I got my license somehow, and I was ready to hit the streets of Chennai. And my grandpa was with me, and one day, we were heading back, and it was like on a very crowded street, and I had an altercation. Yes, my first drive through the city, and this is what happened. I scraped another car, another Ambi, but I didn't think it was my fault. The guy was equally at fault. But when he got down and he glared at me, it really put fear, because he was this big man with a long nose and a pockmarked face, and he looked really furious. And my grandpa said, just go back and sit in the car. I'll deal with him. And my grandpa paid him the big sum of 200 rupees for him to fix that paint job. It wasn't even a dent, because the Ambi was built so strong and, with good metal, that it didn't dent easily. So, after that, I was traumatized, to be honest with you. I didn't want to drive in those crowded streets. And luckily for me, I had an escape, because soon I got married and came to this country. So I didn't have to drive in India ever again. So life went on. And, soon I was here in the US getting used to, life here, and raising my kids and doing all that. And we would go every summer to India and spend the entire summer there. And we would see many Ambis at that time in the 80s and the 90s. And they were still, being used. But I could see that the numbers were declining, and that kind of made me sad. But when we relocated to India to try something in Bangalore for a year, we were offered all these cars by my husband's company. And guess what? We turned down all those cool cars and opted for an Ambi. Yes, we were so fond of it. But as luck would have it, it turned out to be a real lemon or a loser Ambi. It stayed in the garage the entire year that we were there, and we had to use a substitute. I think it was a Premier Padmini. So we never got to enjoy that Ambi again. And over the years, I noticed that it was becoming extinct, like those huge, big elephants that it looked like. And by the time, I realized that very quickly the Ambi was almost not visible, except for one abandoned Ambi here or there. It went totally out of production. Well, it was time to say goodbye to it. Like an old friend, you have to part with, right? Sometimes. And when we came back and we came to terms with that, we decided that we would go in for another car that was kind of the closest thing to the Ambi in our minds. Well, a Honda Odyssey minivan. So we got a gray minivan, again, very much like an elephant, even a little more stretched out and longer. And this one became our favorite car, and it served us really well. And there was an additional bonus. This car also had a voice. It spoke, and this sweet, sexy voice that navigated us all over. And very soon we fell in love with that voice, and we named her Mishi, like we had named the original one Betsy. This one, being of Japanese origin, was Mishi. And Mishi served us well. But there's always a place in my heart for the good old Ambi, my childhood friend that I will always miss. Thank you.
Thank you, Roopa. Good old Ambi. Brings back so many memories. Ambassador is the grand old dame. All of us have at some point of time either ridden, people of our generation. I don't
Yeah.
know about today's generation, whether they know about ambassador cars, but sturdy, strong, enough space, and a comfortable family car. Thank you for sharing this lovely personal story. I think you premiered it on Storytellers Cafe, and we really appreciate it.
Oh, my
Wonderful. All
pleasure. My
times
pleasure.
memories of Premier Padmini and all that.
Yeah, before all the foreign cars took over, and
Yes, yes, of
yeah,
course, of course. Now it's like one of the vintage cars.
yeah,
Ambi has become vintage now.
yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing such a lovely story as well as the Japanese one. And it's been a pleasure to host you on Storytellers Cafe. And is there anything that you would like to tell us before you leave the studios? Something that you would like to share that you've remembered? So,
This is Thanksgiving time. So I am very grateful and I feel very blessed that all of us are able to connect and keep our spirits up, especially during this surreal time, of COVID, with families being, separated. But somehow we are keeping things going, and I really appreciate that all the technology and all the people that have helped us keep moving forward, and especially what you're doing now is very, very much appreciated. It's wonderful, and it's a great way to connect with people, like-minded people, I would say, and that's what storytelling has done, right? It has brought together like-minded people and made us all in this, become part of this big tribe. I think it's a new tribe that we are all, I think you've been doing this for a while, but I'm relatively new. So I really am enjoying this phase of my life, and I wish you the very best, and I look forward to hearing more storytellers come on your show and share their stories.
thank you, Rupa. Yes, I thank Bharat FM for giving me this opportunity to have a 30-minute slot, which can actually go a little longer if we pre record the show. So, thank you, Bharat FM, and for, kind of kickstarting Storytellers Cafe so that one remains connected. And like you said it beautifully, stories connect people. So, and that is what we should do, or we are doing during these difficult times, and to share our stories, to share our strengths, our weaknesses through stories is what makes it easier to kind of deal with these difficult times. So, once again, I thank you. Thank you, everybody, to all the listeners and viewers who are listening to Storytellers Cafe. Please listen. Do drop in your comments on the chat when you're listening, watching Rupa, and we would love to hear from you, and also like to know from which part of the world you're listening to, because this is also at the same time broadcast on YouTube as well, Rupa. So there are many people who are regularly listening, but sometimes we don't come to know who they are. So we would really love to hear from you people. And happy Thanksgiving. Have a wonderful, wonderful day for all you in California, and good evening and good night to people in India. Thank you. See you again next week.
Bye bye.
Bye.
This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत एफएम।
बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत।